something's got to change. Something's going to give. It's like the worst storm. It's like if they're having the lockdowns and they're having this economic shutdown, it's actually going to cause costs of things to go up. But then we also don't produce like much for consumer goods. They are the hub for consumer goods in this world. We're in a global economy. Any country we are involved with, they're hurting. In return, we are going to hurt.
When I was broke, I had rich habits. When I was broke, I had rich
Welcome. Neal, how's it going, buddy?
Are we on right now?
I think we're on. Are we on?
We on?
All right, we're on.
Okay,
So
we're on.
this is the Master Keys podcast.
Yeah, welcome to the Master Keys podcast, season 2, episode.
Ooh, I don't know.
We don't know this time, but we're getting fingers in the back.
We don't know. It doesn't matter.
We don't know. Anyways, I'm Neal and
I'm Chandler Halliburton. We are real estate investors and real estate agents, and this is a wealth building, real estate investing podcast.
Yeah, we want to do this to help you guys kind of grow your wealth, grow your businesses, maybe learn some stuff about real estate investing. We are not financial advisors, but we want to give you all of our opinions and best tips that we've learned through experiences that we've succeeded and failed at.
Yeah, and if you get anything out of the content here, we ask that you like it, subscribe, post any comments or questions down below, and share this video with someone else that you think might get some value out of it.
Yeah. Today we're going to be talking about a bunch of different news topics going on in Canada, the States, the Metaverse, and then our main topic
And
today.
abroad.
What's
China.
our main topic?
Man, things are going crazy in China. We've talked about this a little bit in some previous episodes with the mortgage strike, even with the, attempting to create a new currency with Russia. Evergrande, them defaulting on like $300 billion worth of loans that they've got out there. All this crazy stuff happening over in China that is now slowly starting to leak out into our news stream here. It's major because it's going to impact us. China is the second biggest economy in the world. And so what goes on in China, as arm's length as it feels, very much impacts what's going on here for us. So we're going to unpack what's going on in China right now. You need to check this out because we're all trying to make our predictions as to what's going to happen in 2023, what are the big stories going to be, and how that's going to influence how we invest. And China is going to be a big part of what goes on in the world next year, even more so than they already have been in the last half century or so.
Yeah, everything they do impacts everything that we feel. And
they are struggling. And if they're struggling as the second biggest economy...
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's going to trickle down. But before we jump into the news, I just want to mention, thanks to everyone listening. Last episode we mentioned if we get 100 likes on our YouTube video, we're going to do a conspiracy episode. We're so close. We're like 20 likes away. If you can if you listen on Spotify, if you don't mind, just going on the YouTube, giving us a quick like. We're trying to get there. What we're saying, you know what? We'll pick someone out of the 100 and we'll give you a 15-minute call to go over a deal, go over a portfolio, whatever you want to chat about. If you just want to shoot the shit, we can also just do that.
Totally.
But yeah, just please go over to YouTube, give us a like, and we're gonna do that conspiracy episode, and you can hear all of our weird ideas.
Well, I mean, that's a good segue because honestly, China and what goes on in China is also very interesting when you start getting into like conspiracy. There's some conspiracy theories coming out of China right now with respect to these protests that are going on and how the government is trying to clamp down on them. We'll highlight that later, but let's get into some news headlines. Neal, what do you got?
Well, okay, so you want to go first? Oh, Jesus.
You want me to go first?
Yeah, I want you to go first.
Okay. Well, I mean, let's kind of go into the U.S. Let's start with the other major player in the world. So their most recent inflation numbers came out, and for July was 8.5%, which, believe it or not, is being heralded as a big win.
Where was that before?
It was at 9.1 before.
Oh, it's coming way down.
It's coming way down.
Shit's free again.
But additionally, there's the main consumer price index, which covers virtually, well, not everything. There's a lot of things glaringly omitted from it. But in the U.S., they've got one that includes food and energy prices, and then they've got one where they kind of back that out. And that one that was backed out actually didn't increase kind of much at all. So Biden I think there was one soundbite where he said, we got zero inflation, and that's because they're one that doesn't account for food and energy, only grew like 0.3%. But food and energy are the biggest things that people spend their money on. So
and you have to spend your money on is the other thing.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. They're kind of inelastic demand on feeding yourself and heating your home.
If electronics didn't spike, like it's not a big deal. You can survive without all the new electronics, but you can't without your heating your home and feeding yourself. But I mean, in general, I think we are seeing everywhere like a bit of a turn down on the inflation a little bit. Like obviously rates are up.
Yeah.
So hopefully it continues through. Like fingers crossed, because I don't want them to try and fix this by just continuing to jack the rates. I was looking at charts over the weekend because I'm trying to decide. I have a mortgage renewal coming up right now, and I was trying to decide if I want to go fixed or variable.
Go variable, you coward.
I did variable, Chandler.
Hey-o!
I did variable, Chandler.
Attaboy.
And but I was just looking at them and like, man, like in the 80s. They were just like, all right, like inflation's crazy, so we went up a few points. Inflation's still crazy, we went up a few more points.
I wish.
All right, you know what? Screw it. We're going up by like
80s, man.
15%. And I'm like, so it's just like in my head, I'm like, I hope they don't try and handle this. And luckily my girlfriend's there and she's very smart, master of economics. And she was like, look, they learn every time. And every time they've gotten smarter and smarter. And if you look at every time there's been a recession or a major issue since, they've done less and less manipulation of the rates. They're a little faster to do it. Because they're reacting. They're not trying to do it gradually. Like, okay, we need to slap this and stop this before it gets out of hand. And so hopefully this time, that's what they're
You're
doing.
giving them a lot of credit because they were absolutely late to the draw. And I think
Yeah,
the bigger
I
issue is
know.
people always reference like, oh, what about the 70s and, you know, monetary policy in the 70s? It was a complete disaster. And like, oh, what about the crazy inflation, high interest rates of the 80s? Back then, people did not carry as much debt. Businesses did not carry as much debt. It was a different time. You know, that lever that you used to be able to ratchet with smaller repercussions, for better or for worse, now has huge repercussions. Repercussions? Oh my God. I combined ramifications and repercussions into one word.
I really want to see this office that you talk about that has these levers. You keep talking about there's an office where they just have levers where they print money, they can crank up interest rates.
Man, actually, that reminds me.
touch
Some
one.
guy was like,
Click
they
the big
don't
red button.
actually print money. That's not how it works. Like, no kidding, man. That's like the terminology for.
But they do actually pull the levers.
They do pull the
there's
levers. The
physical
levers are
levers.
real. There's
Those are-
literally a story that just like dials the interest rate a little bit. But yeah, it has bigger sweeping changes in a short period of time because we are such a debtor society now.
Yes, totally. And we're going to actually talk about that again with the China stuff because the debt's so heavy.
Yeah.
I want to get into something a little bit more.
Okay.
I'm gonna say a
But the
little more
funny
light.
thing is, I think just to kind of like just finish that thought is because they're heralding that as some sort of win, there was then some conversation of like, well, does that mean maybe we should stop the increases on the interest rate?
Yes, because I just
And-
signed a variable, so yes.
Well, this is the Fed in the U.S., but the same logic is
We
going to
follow-
trickle
we follow
down to
suit.
Canada because by the time this episode comes out, it's going to be, I don't know, mid-August.
Yep.
Right? And the Bank of Canada meets again September 7th, I believe, to do their next interest rate hike. And seeing what the Fed and how the Fed's going to react to this quote-unquote slowdown will be interesting because we're also, the day that this comes out, the following day, StatCan will publish their inflation numbers for July. So that's going to be really telling too, because these things are trending and they're lagging indicators. So as silly as it is for them to get excited about going from 9.1% to 8.5%, realizing how long it takes these things to go into place, it's them sort of thinking, well, if we went from 9.1 to 8.5, we're probably now actually sitting in real right in this
6 or
moment
something like
at
that.
a little bit less and trending in the right direction. So
It usually starts gradual too, and then it'll pick up a little bit
yeah.
of pace with the impact of what they've done, right?
yeah. Plus, Biden is approval rating is at an all-time low. So he's done things like
haven't heard
kill
much about
an
him.
evil terrorist because that's always good for approval rating. They got their big spending bill that used to be called Build Back Better. They changed it, I think, to like an anti-inflation bill. They got that passed. And so could I imagine a scenario whereby there's some political pressure applied by the Democrats to lessen federal rate increases? I could see that for sure.
Yeah.
And maybe that same thing is going to happen here in Canada. Time will tell. But so, yeah, what do you got for me? What do you got?
Yeah, I said I want to get something a little more light, something a little, I'm not going to call it
That's light.
funny, a little more interesting. But Brampton realtor
Okay.
gets in a machete, gets attacked with machetes.
Whoa.
And the reason this really hit home
Okay.
is he's
Machetes?
a realtor and a podcaster.
Oh, not the podcast.
Not the podcasters. Yeah, in his
Oh my
his
God.
driveway, and I have a video here to
Hopefully
show
they
you.
didn't get his face. That's our moneymaker.
That is our, not us, maybe him, but look at this.
Whoa.
They're just like, now my thing is, and this is what's weird, is there's no motive cited, and he's not bleeding, and they're
I don't know, dude. It's blurred out. How he could be bleeding profusely.
I don't want to call it anything because I don't want to be lighthearted or anything like that. But like, if you have
Rewind that back.
if you have three dudes with machetes, and we're gonna put this clip over ours, and if you have three dudes with machetes hitting you like
Yeah.
that, I'm pretty sure.
And one guy's got an axe.
This I mean, if you got attacked with
People
three
need
guys
to
with a
watch this
machete and
video.
an axe,
I feel terrible. We might get YouTube censored for this.
I
We're not
know,
showing
and
the
I
video,
feel kind of
but-
awkward calling it out, but it's a little weird that there's no motive. They don't know who did it, and then there's also like
Oh my. Oh, this lady threw a shoe at them.
she threw a shoe at them and they just
Man,
ran away. But if
Shout
they
outs to
had-
that lady, man. Coming into see three guys swinging machetes and axes at a guy, and she rolls up to stop it. But wow,
Are you 100% convinced that this is Dude, if I got attacked, if I got out of my car and some 3 guys came at me with machetes and axes, I don't think I would be walking away. And I also don't think my mom throwing a shoe at them would get rid of them.
Well, your mom's an intimidating woman, first of all.
That's true, actually. Maybe shout out to my mom. She's going to be listening to this. She'd be like, I would beat the shit out of them.
I mean, yeah, we need to tread carefully because I'm not making light of this.
I don't want to make
But they
light
need
of
to
the
sharpen
situation.
their knives and their axe because...
That was the dullest axe I've ever seen.
Um,
Anyways, I don't want to, don't want to make light of the situation.
Man.
Some stuff's going to come out. But
realtor
for me, I'm like,
and a podcast, double
yeah,
whammy.
but whatever.
Aren't those everyone's 2 favorite people? I don't know how that happened.
Yeah, exactly. Apparently, he's not the favorite everywhere. But anyway, so that was an interesting one. Take a look at the clip.
The ladies.
Wild.
Sorry, I'm making light of this poor guy, but hopefully,
he's
hopefully
in
he
the
does
hospital.
okay.
Said, but he's gonna be okay.
I heard he's got a showing tonight at 7, actually, so he'll be there. He'll be there.
This also is not the first time this happened. Apparently, there's been guns and other violence at his home. So,
okay, so this dude's into some stuff.
Yeah, I don't think it's a podcast, but
potentially some people have theorized. I don't know. Can we get? I'm not.
Yeah. Moving on. I just want to
yeah.
say it because it was a big headline, and I saw they were wielding axes. I said we had to talk about it. I'm gonna give you another topic from Toronto while we're on the Toronto topic, and that is a new startup called Wahi. I think it's how
Called
it's pronounced. Wahi.
Wahi,
Wahi.
Okay.
And the idea and their thing is that they are going to be able to tell you if a neighborhood is being overbid. And the way that they're doing this is they're tracking sold prices versus list prices,
that's the same data we already have. But
which is the same, which we have here, but they don't have there. It's not public access there.
Okay.
Right? Like when you go on their websites, they don't have public access to the sale prices. And
Right.
so a lot of times you'll see posts of like sold for 130%. Like they don't ever give you the exact numbers a lot of time. And yeah, you have to ask your realtor to give you a lot of that info.
I didn't realize that. I need to catch up.
Yeah, totally. But I'm sure there's going to be a bunch of realtors that are upset about this because I feel like here they were too. And we came to find out it's actually a really good thing because it helps to educate your clients a lot and it actually makes your job
100%.
easier, I think, in a lot of ways. But my thing was like, I saw this and I'm like, this is very cool. And I'm sure people are going to use this. But then on the flip side, it's like Zillow. Like, how can you say it's an overbid when it's like that house went for 300 and sold for 800, but you didn't factor in that the zoning allows you to build.
Yeah, there's going to be
strip
things
mall.
that slip through the cracks for sure.
Or you didn't factor in that Apple just announced that they're building a new campus outside of Toronto in this neighborhood. And so, yeah, prices are going up like 80%, which is way overbidding, but not really because the values in that area are going to become that because the rental demand is going to spike. The just home ownership demand is going to spike. The average income is going to spike.
Yeah.
So is it an overbid?
Well, what they're going to do is they're going to find some arbitrary measure, not arbitrary, but like price per square foot. And they're going to be like, well, in this area, things have sold for this price per square foot. Now this one sold for more per square foot. And now that's an overpay. It's like, well, there's different valuations on different square footage.
Yeah.
Right? Like if there's 3 bathrooms as opposed to 1 bathroom, then the first place with 3 bathrooms should trade at a higher price per square foot, finish, newness.
And like if someone underlists a home or overprices a home, like intentional price shifting and stuff like that. Like, I don't know. It seems like a cool idea, and I think
it's in the GTA.
It's in the GTA. I think it's really good that they're just trying to track the information and provide it to the clients. That's something I think everywhere they need to have. But
I wonder, is it free? No, price subscription based.
No, it looks to be free. But yeah, I just took a quick peek through it. Like the green's good and red's overbidding. So it's interesting to see that they have neighborhoods already flagged as...
It's a lot of green, which speaks to the point that things are slowing down in the Toronto area. Not so much right in the core, but outside of Toronto. We talked about this before. The volume of sales is down about 20%. It's the same in Vancouver. The area outside of Vancouver, I think, is like around down about 22% in volume, which is something like the biggest drop in 20 years. And as we talked about before, that doesn't account for... Like, there's no adjustment for the fact that the city has ballooned in population and ballooned in the number of homes over the last 20 years, and still this is the lowest volume of sales in 2 decades. So
that is pretty intense.
It's insane. And what that has meant nationwide is that
China when
home sales are down about 4% on the Canadian average. And you can make an argument that in some of the peripheral suburbs, it's quite a bit more than that.
Yeah, and I was to say that's skewed in some ways because I think like Atlantic Canada is still doing solid in some ways. I mean, it's slower, but we
just had last week. What was it? It was over 50% of homes still sold over asking here in our area. I think there was about 100 and some odd sales, like 100 and
it's an
change,
HRM.
which is not a lot of sales. Obviously, people listening to this in some bigger markets are going to be like, only 100 homes were transacted last week.
Yeah.
But that's the case. Only 100 homes were transacted in our metro area here last week, and 50% of them sold over asking.
Yeah, we're still strong. This is a weird one for me. I had we have a listing with our team, and it's been up for 4 weeks,
And then you
and
still got multiple offers.
we just sold over asking multiple offers
Yeah.
this week. I mean, it's not sold, but it was
Yep.
4 weeks in, and now we have 3 offers on the table, and we sold and we accepted over asking.
Yeah, well, the average price too was 101%
Yeah.
of asking, right?
Yeah, so we're still trucking along. And
Yep.
places I think like Alberta are still seeing good strength. So that 4% really is skewed where it's like Toronto and BC might be feeling a huge punch right now, and a couple other places aren't. And this also kind of shows the idea of like following where industry's going. We've talked about before of like jobs and work and those kind of things.
Man, that's so interesting you say that. So in the States, their median price for actually I can't remember. Yeah, I think it was their median price for the US just hit an all-time high of $413,000 US across the country.
Holy shit.
Right? Which in one respect doesn't sound that high.
That's
right?
not, like 500K
comparable.
Canadian.
But I think we're on average higher than that in
Yeah,
Canada.
we were 800.
No, I don't think we're that high, but we're up there.
We were over 7 last year.
Really crazy. So that accounts for some bigger markets, but there's also some really affordable places to live in the U.S. So that number, kind of being comfortably above 400K, is an all-time high. But at the same time, inventory is up about 30% across the country. So again, this is a lagging indicator where home sales are down.
As per CBC, March 2022, average Canadian home price $816,000.
So that was March, but that's come down significantly since then.
Yeah, then it went down to 796 in May, and it's now 746 as per CTV.
Wow. So we've given back a solid amount there, about 7%.
Still. Quite.
But the U.S., the prices have still been rising, while at the same time inventory is ticking up. So that tells us a couple things. But the biggest one is that all of this data is lagging. The same thing that we talked about with the inflation stuff, the data is lagging. So it's, days on market and inventory is what you really should be looking to rather than average prices. It's how long are things sitting on the market, how many things are selling, how much supply is there out there.
Inventory is everything, supply and demand.
Yeah. So that's, it'll be interesting to see how that bears out. But with that, because you were talking about migration and industry and all this.
Yep.
I found this super cool. Redfin is another major search engine that people can use down in the States. I think it's in Canada too, is it?
I think it might be, but predominantly in the States.
They found that recent searches, over 30% of the people looking for homes are not looking in their metro area. They're looking in other areas. So that means 1/3 of people in the U.S., when they're shopping for homes, are now thinking of changing location because of the cost of living in their area. So you have a lot of people migrating around the states to go to cities and states that have cheaper homes and cheaper cost of living for things like taxation and all that.
That's actually insane. I wonder if that's skewed by people like looking like I look at giant houses in Toronto and BC all the time, but I'm not going to buy one.
They've been recording this data for as long as Redfin's been around, and this is the highest ever.
Oh, I believe that. I totally believe that. Yeah.
What do you see that's going to do in Canada? Where do you think people are going to move from where to where?
Well, I think you're going to see a bunch of people move back to Alberta, right?
You think?
Well, industry's picking back up, right? Like oil and gas is going to have another run. You've already seen, like you're saying, we watched it. A lot of people move from the western provinces to Atlantic Canada, and that's continuing now. Like everywhere I drive around, on top of it being tourist season, but everywhere you drive around, there are Ontario plates and Alberta plates and like just plates from Quebec, like everywhere, all over the place, constantly, and you still see it. Like,
but are we still cheaper here?
But see, by factors, once you include taxes, cost of living, and the expenses you have to spend, not necessarily. But I think the sticker price, the sticker shock, we don't have the sticker shock. And the other thing is, I think yes, we are, because realistically, it's like, yeah, a house is still $700,000, but you're 15 minutes from downtown and all the offices. If you were 15 minutes in any other city from downtown and all the offices, that same house would be like $3.5 million. Like that's, I think, one of the big differences.
Yeah.
But there's also a style of living here that a lot of people start to appreciate if they're from like central Canada. That people are starting to have an interest in. Like there's a lot of ocean-based things that we can do that are super fun. World-renowned golf. Like there are things that also bring people out here. So I think that's going to continue. And I know the city's putting a big push on tech-based.
We also talked about
industries.
the fact that some of these things, people's biggest expense is their energy, their food, and their housing.
Yeah.
Well, energy and food are pretty much going to be the same across the country, more or less.
Alberta energy is going to be more affordable.
Well, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
But otherwise, that's a great point.
Yeah.
But the other two things are going to be relatively the same. So
Yep.
that just leaves housing. And as these interest rates have gone up and up and up, that actually, in a weird way, helps our cause because, like you said, asking
multiplier.
price, the ticket price wise, we are still a cheaper option to some of these bigger markets while providing this great quality of life and while still being able to live in the downtown. Because as I just mentioned, the core areas are still strong. Like
Totally.
in these major markets, Vancouver, Toronto, et cetera, it's the periphery areas where, my God, like you have to live so far out of town and they're getting crushed. But for people who actually still want to live in a city, we are by far a more affordable option, especially as these interest rates have gone through the roof.
Simply looking at averages, the Canadian average is now 750. It was 800. In Halifax, it was, I think, 500, and it's probably closer to 450 now. So we're still probably about 40%, 40% off of the average. So we're in good shape. Speaking of, I mentioned some tech stuff, and in a different land, talking about prices, Metaverse.
Okay, yeah.
Mark-
Man, the metaverse is chilled out. since
Well,
the
the
economy
Metaverse has
turned
chilled
down.
out big time. So we're down from the highs in November of 2021. We're down 60%. So it's come way down. And Mark Cuban's gone on record to say he thinks it's the stupidest investment ever to invest in the Metaverse.
Okay.
And his idea was basically that there's no utility and you can create an infinite amount of land.
Yeah, it's escapism. It's not finite. I totally agree with him. And we talked about this when these people were starting like their own little universes. Like, no, our universe is finite. It's like, well, that's fine while your universe is cool. But
don't
as soon
agree.
as someone switches to somewhere else, then that's no longer cool.
No,
It's like,
no.
well, tell that to MySpace and MSN Messenger and ICQ. Like those were to some degree meta spaces that existed, and they all went out of vogue. And now, what are they worth? Like if you say you own a piece of your old ICQ account, like that's not worth anything
I
anymore.
don't even know what that is. So
There you go. Shout out to ICQ. Post your ICQ number if you still know it. be
it's
on
weird
NA.
because he likes cryptocurrencies because he sees utility in them.
Yeah.
I agree to what you're saying to an extent, but I honestly disagree in some ways too. There is utility because our coming up generation is spending more and more and more time online. And so to create areas and places that they can spend that time and connect with other people is super important, and it's going to become more valuable.
Why do they need a house there?
And some of the but it doesn't have to be a house. Like that's the thing. It's like a small form of thinking of like it has to be a house, but it's not necessarily a house. Like there's areas that people interact in. Like Fortnite was kind of a step into the metaverse, and it is by hand. Like hands down, it's been the most popular game ever. Roblox, same thing. Like what is it? 80% of people under 12 years old have played Roblox. Like.
Yeah.
That generation's going to grow up and they're going to be used to doing that stuff and interacting with their friends in those spaces and doing things. Even now, I see my colleagues in the evenings, instead of physically getting together, will spend a lot of their time in, let's say, a metaverse, which is a racing game or a shooting game. And
Yeah.
that's how they connect and they hang out. And so, like, those spaces will have merit and value. The other thing regarding, like, the concept of being able to infinitely produce more land, that is definitely an aspect. But in some ways, like, the world is like this. I know we don't have an infinite amount of land. Obviously, we have a finite amount of land on the earth. But like once a city is created, like I could technically just drive 2 hours or 3 hours outside of the city and buy a massive piece of land and build my own neighborhood and city.
Yeah.
But like there's an intrinsic value that's been built by this city being here for a certain period of time, and there's things that it offers
Totally, but
that
man,
can't just
like,
instantly be moved over.
when things are virtual, they fall out of favor. When there's we just talked about how
It can change faster. It'll
It
move
changes
faster.
way
But
faster.
cities grow and die too. There's lots like Atlantic Canada is a prime example of a lot of cities that you can drive around and like they have big old brick buildings and the city's toast. And it's like, yeah, this was a boom town at one time because they had utility through production of pulp or coal
Yeah.
at one point in time, and now they're dead. And if you look back, like
well,
the
that's what I'm saying.
migration,
So,
we're
like,
seeing
these
migration of people
meta
and
places
movements
can bust very, very
way
easily,
faster. Boom and bust
right?
way
Like,
faster.
And who's going to be holding the bag is going to be people who like say try to like put their life savings into these things and it doesn't pan out.
But I think there's also people who know what's going on that will be able to boom and make money even faster.
Yeah.
Like you can become a real estate tycoon probably in a much faster way, and you can still make like billions of dollars within these spaces because there's
Yeah.
people spending as much or more time in those spaces as people did 30 years ago in office buildings.
They're going to be just big pump and dump things. I really think they are. Because
To
like,
an
a city's going
extent.
to become cool, and then someone else is going to start another city, and it's cool because over here, you can just be here for free and blah, 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 blah. And then all of a sudden, all the advertisers are going to come in. It's like, all right, well, we want to be there, obviously. And then they're going to come in and blah, blah, blah. And they're just going to move. And
Timing's everything though. Like
Yeah.
you look like Facebook is not been pumping down. Like those ones you mentioned, not that they weren't good, but their timing was a little early. Like the adoption of those systems and people mass consuming like a MySpace wasn't quite there yet. But now you look at Facebook, like it's created itself as a staple. And you got to continue growing and modifying, otherwise you die, and you integrate yourselves into people's lives. And so the metaverses that will succeed and grow and all that will integrate themselves into people's lives.
There's room for a bunch of them, personally.
No, there won't be. It's like anything. There'll be a few that they come out, and that's why I think like right now it's super early. You might be an early adopter and get super, I think, lucky in investing in the right one that blows up. It's same with cryptos, right? There's going to be a few that succeed because of the technologies that they offer. But I don't know. I think for me, I'm like, I think Mark Hewitt might be speaking on the fact that he doesn't necessarily totally, I don't want to say understand it, but like he doesn't feel it because he's not interested in that. He's not from the generation that would value that kind of usage. And I think our younger gen is going to be,
neither am I for that matter.
Going to be keen to use it, right? I think like once wearables become super common and people are like wearing like contacts that allow you to kind of access these spaces, I think things like metaverse-based spaces will become more and more prevalent, and actually people will enjoy them and value them. But anyways, that's my thought.
See, let's go back to the real world and a real city that's done really well for a very long time. Don't cheat because you're a cheater when it comes to these things.
I have never cheated.
What is the average rent now in Manhattan? The average. It hit a new high. We talked about this not that long ago, so it might be still top of your mind. We're talking Manhattan specifically. What's the average rent?
$3,700 a month.
Way low. Higher.
Was it higher than that? Oh, bleep that out. $5,400 a month.
Oh, now you're shade high. 5113.
It was
$5,113. So it had just tipped over $5,000 a month for the June numbers, and now for July. This is Douglas Elliman that put this out.
That's epic, man. Like that is
5,113. Now you had a theory about this, that some of this was, places that hadn't been on market for a while, and we talked about the fact that there's been this big spike as people have gotten squeezed out, and now they can get these new rents.
Yeah, I don't know what is all encompassed. First off, like I'm just like blown away. Like that's $6,500 a month Canadian, like. And that's out. There's a lot of apartments there, so I'm like, holy crap! That means again, half of them on average are more expensive. Which means there's people like there's a consistent number of people paying $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 a month. And yeah, my theory was just like, it's funny, like in Toronto, and I mean we had some people message us that are in Toronto that are leasing agents, realtors, and have worked there, and they said, no, this is legit, like the rates are going up this fast.
Yeah, 100%.
But like my thing is that as rates go up and approvals need to be accomplished in these overinflated cities where the values don't meet the possible revenues and like are not supported, people are just creating leases that are allowing them to get approved financially. And so that's why it's like, oh yeah, rates went up by 5 or 2%, 200 basis points, which increased your payment by 30%. And then somehow overnight, rents went up by 31%. And you're like, okay, everyone's still getting their takeouts now, right?
Yeah.
And just
I don't think that's enough to move this needle, man.
To explain that, right? Like that is people are not getting approved mortgages purely based on their income. Everyone in Toronto doesn't make enough money to approve a $3 million mortgage. They're utilizing the income from their properties to also add and get approved from the bank. And so what I was saying is that as the rates go up and that payment goes up, to service that debt, they're also just artificially increasing the value of their leases, which takes place a lot in these big cities. I've heard a lot from a lot of brokers and lawyers that there is a lot of falsified stuff, and it's coming out in the news a lot. That like in BC, all these falsified papers.
Yeah.
But Manhattan's been like this for 100 years. Like, it's insane. But that is $6,000 a month, man.
Yeah, that's a lot of rent, man.
That's the average. That's the average. That's like the highest here.
Yeah. So that trend seems like it's going to continue even as the housing market for purchasing and selling slows down. The rental market is going up and up. We talked about in the last episode, if you're a university town like we are here, it's going to get worse before it gets better. So.
Speaking of luxury, I don't even have this written down, but I want to ask what your opinion is. The luxury tax coming in on private jets, yachts, and fancy cars.
What do I think about it?
Yeah. Do you think it's good, bad? You concerned about
I think it's,
when the RAV4s break 100K that they're going to start taxing for it?
I mean, I like to fly under that radar anyway. Is that in Canada?
Oh, yeah. September 1st. It's coming up. 20% on everything.
I don't... What constitutes a luxury vehicle?
Luxury vehicles over $100,000. Luxury boats over $250,000. Luxury aircraft, I think, is over $250,000 as well. And
I mean, aren't all aircrafts luxury? If you own an aircraft, that's some luxury.
No, man, there's utility aircraft. How does everyone think all their stuff gets around so fast?
Oh my goodness.
Seriously, like people like so, if you live in a remote place, like you're not living in a luxury aircraft. It's like my food comes in on a plane.
I know, but I assume this would be personal luxury items, not like our corporation. Has a.
Some people have them though for stuff.
Airplane. I mean, This is a sign of our times. People do not like people who have wealth. We do not like people being too fancy. We do not like people getting a little too high on their horse.
Yeah, 100
Why?
grand.
Why we feel that way, I don't know. We've also talked about that from a real proportionate contribution to our tax base. Wealthier people do pay more taxes than less wealthy people. There's a misconception that they don't pay their fair share. In fact, they pay more than their fair share. Whether or not you think that's good, bad, or otherwise, that's another thing, but that is just factual, the numbers. I don't get it, man. Like, why can't we have nice things? Because, like, here's the thing about this. So the person who bought that has paid more tax already than anyone else, right? They pay more tax on their income. They pay more tax on their house. Both the provincial and federal levels, and any way you slice it, they are paying more taxes. And then they've purchased a luxury item, which, injects a lot of imaginary money into the economy. Like, this is not someone buying up water reserves or buying up more than their fair share of trees or food and hoarding it. This is buying something that is for all intents and purposes, a stupid waste of money that no one else even wants, but they buy it, and as a result, that company has more money, which then employs their people and all of these things. If this was I would be more interested in taxing wealthy individuals who are hoarding resources. Like, if you're a wealthy person who hoards a bunch of, farmland, like, tax the heck out of that. Like, taxing them for buying, these stupid, like, that has no burden on the average person.
People to spend money.
Yeah, it doesn't burden the general populace. In fact, wealthy people sending this stupid money downhill to these companies that sell this stuff, and then in turn their employees and the overall economy, is actually a really good thing. So I don't think it makes sense, but it looks really great, for political fodder in these times where, this is the stuff that people go, yeah, stick it to them. Like, whatever.
You're about to see a lot of pickup trucks priced at $99,900. Like, I'm not.
$100 grand for a pickup truck anyway. That seems crazy.
That's what the big HDs go for. They're about 103 to $108,000. But yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of on the same page. I don't understand kind of why this is how they exactly intend to do it. Like, on spending money, I think you should incentivize your people to spend money. Because that's kind of how it keeps the turnover going. Like you said, it injects cash, keeps the companies going, keeps people employed. So I'm not super excited about this. Obviously, like, I have some vehicles that I'm going to have to start paying this tax on when I go to buy, because I like flipping cars. I like flipping luxury cars. So I don't know. I'm not super stoked about it. But oddly enough, and like, this happens everywhere when they put these taxes in, it just forces the price up even more.
What percentage?
It's 20%.
20% at the time of purchase, or?
Yeah, as far as I understand.
And that's on top of the existing
15%,
taxes?
Yeah. So here you'd pay 35% on top. So if you buy a car for $100,000, you spend $35,000 in tax. So it's pretty substantial.
Man, and if you think, like, this is the school of thought of, if we just give more money to the government, all of our problems will go away.
Yeah.
Like, why we've started to think that way is beyond me. History proves it's not the case. But so now, rather than just giving 15% to the government, who's done such an awesome job with that 15%, if we only give them like an extra 20%, if we can get that number up to 35%, suddenly all of our problems will go away, because this is what we love in Canada now, is just more government and more taxation. And I don't know how we got here.
God, this kills my vibe. I'm just thinking about this now. I'm like, September 1st is so soon.
Dude, it's in 2 weeks, so yeah, liquidate those cars, Neal. Hey, thanks for listening so far. If you've liked what you've heard, like, subscribe, comment, anything you can do for us, we really appreciate it. Keep listening here. We're going to get into the China situation and how it's going to impact what goes on here locally, whether it's in your metro area or across Canada. What happens over there is going to give us some signals as to what could happen here. So check that out. Keep listening. Thanks so much.
No.
All right. On that cheery note, you got anything else? Or are we moving into China?
No. Let's get into China. That's
yeah. So all these things that seem so far away, and we talked about the Netherlands farming situation, and you can see that bubbling in Western Canada now, and what the Liberals are trying to do with their kind of reduction in certain emissions. All these things that happen abroad, we need to look at how they're going to impact us directly, but also where the trends are going, because it may feel and seem sometimes like we have nothing in common with China, but people are people, governments are governments, banks are banks, real estate is real estate, economics is economics. These things not only are going to impact us through trade and through money flows and through people flows, but also they're an indicator of what could be coming down the pipeline. So tell me if any of this sounds familiar. The Chinese economy, second biggest GDP in the world, has an over-reliance on real estate. Does that sound like anyone you know here in North America? We've been pretty reliant. We've been talking about this, how most of the GDP growth in Canada over the last decade or so has been due to real estate growth, effectively. So they're up around 30%. We're at a paltry 20%, but still you see that tie there. Then their banking system is based on fractional reserves, whereby if you deposit $1,000 into a bank, they only are required to hold a fraction of that, and the remainder they can lend out, i.e. they hold $1,000 and then they lend it out to Neal. So now Neal's got $900, he goes and spends it, and the person Neal spends it on, they take that $900 and put it in the bank, and the bank again holds 10% of it, right, which is $90, and then they lend out the remaining $810, and it goes on and on and on, so that the original $1,000 is leveraged time and time and time again. Does that sound at all familiar?
It does.
It's the same banking system, more or less, that we have here. Any banking experts are going to take
Slightly more aggressive, but
yeah,
yes.
yeah. So, and then they've gotten to this situation where, because of the way real estate market has done over time, 70% of Chinese wealth over the last, I think it's 2 decades, was funneled into real estate investments. And predominantly, this was people investing their personal money into real estate because it was seen as this never slowing down, really strong, secure thing. And they needed to, quote unquote, keep up. And so they were investing heavily in real estate, which then caused a bit of a boom in real estate. All sounding pretty familiar so far.
Super familiar.
Yeah. So then it gets a little bit dicey. They were big on the pre-construction sales, which is something you've probably heard here, but you think of it as like, I bought my home and it's going to be ready in 6 to 10 months.
They're pre-city construction sales.
Yeah. And in bigger markets like Toronto and Vancouver, and we had this was pitched to us for people who've listened to the show a long time. Do you remember when that group came in and talked to us about pre-construction sales? Were you there for that?
No, I missed it.
Yeah, so it was a group out of Toronto, and they're like, hey, you can come here, and here's this building project, and this is the location, and they show you this rendering. It's like, damn, that's the biggest building I've ever seen in my life. And like, it should be ready in 5 to 6 years. You can buy a unit now, and all we need is a deposit. And the deposit's, maybe a couple installments of $20,000 over a period of years.
They get you up to 20%, 25% by the closing date.
Yeah, so it's like, $20,000 now, another $20,000 we're at this point, and so on and so on and so on. But they do that because then effectively they can go to their lender and say, we have these units sold, so now you can advance us the funds to actually build the project, and that can take 5 or so years. Then when the project's close to being built, you, owning this piece of paper that says you've got 1 unit, can sell your agreement at the market price 5 years from now, which historically has always been much higher, and your investment of, say, $60,000 or $80,000 or $100,000, the unit that you've bought has maybe gone up in value from $450,000 to $600,000, and you make $150,000 off your smaller investment. And this has been going on in Toronto and Vancouver for quite some time now. But China invented that. Like, they've been about that.
They're
for a
pre-selling
long
literally
time.
cities. Like when I said that, I wasn't a joke. I mean, like there's like a field, and they're like, we're gonna build a city here, not just one building. There's a whole city coming. We have no roads in place yet, but we are pre-selling units in a place that has no roads. And prepare yourself.
Yeah, and the local governments, that is their number one source of revenue, is they make money off of these pre-sales through taxation and permits, and the city eats off of real estate sales. Again, does that remind you of any place that you've heard of? Think of all the extra money from deed transfer tax and property taxes that have been going to our governments here at the municipal level and at the provincial level, and they're still not done. They want to add all these extra taxes to it for out-of-province buyers and all of these things, and that has been lining the pockets of municipal governments for quite some time. And in China, it's even worse, because if you have this, town that's relatively small, but this developer comes in and is about to build, a cool 3,000 units, and you're going to get paid off every single one, you're all fired up about that. Then This is where they start to get really aggressive. The banking system here in Canada, we're very fortunate. It's pretty conservative and it's heavily regulated. You know, we have the central bank, the Bank of Canada. We all know about that. And then we have kind of our major banks, and they're really big. And for better or worse, they make it so no smaller banks can exist, which is very different than the States.
Yep.
Like, you know more
There's
about
a
the
million small banks in the
Yeah.
States. And they've had an open banking system, which in some ways has allowed them to grow and turn their money over really fast. I think it's actually a better system, but they have a very close banking system, which is more similar to us, where they have to approve and they only have a certain number of banks that can offer certain products. But yeah, continue. I'll let you finish.
Yeah, so China as well, like there are more banks. Like just simply put, they don't have kind of, I mean, they have major big banks, but they also have a number of slightly smaller banks of varying size.
Yep.
And they can develop their own lending practice how they choose, obviously with the oversight of the government. But one thing that was approved for these pre-construction things is that you can get issued a mortgage on a property that's not yet built. And we talked about this in a previous episode where these large development projects that young people would, you know, build up and get the down payment, they would start paying mortgages in some cases for years before the unit was even built. So that these massive developers, and these were the biggest real estate developers in the world, and everyone's heard about Evergrande, we talked about it. Biggest real estate developers in the world, they were collecting all this monthly mortgage
Seems
amounts,
insane. I don't even get that.
and which essentially were kind of issued between obviously the bank, but also the developer would have access to these mortgage products, and that would presumably go towards building the units. The problem is they quickly hit a backlog, and all the mortgage funds that I might be paying them was actually going to build Neal's house that he purchased 3 years previous
Literally
and still
feels like a
didn't
pyramid
have.
scheme. Like,
It starts to get a little pyramid-y, right? And the only
like
way
from The
to keep it
Office.
going is you start having to bring in more and more people, and to try to catch up on the backlog of units. And a stat came up that something like since 2013, these major developers, Evergrande included, only delivered on about 60% of the houses that they promised. So you're talking about a decade, they fell 40% short on finished houses as compared to what they quote unquote sold and what people were paying mortgages on.
where's the money going? I gotta cut you off for a second here. Like, so if everyone's following, like, basically, these guys are taking all the money to go, and we've talked about Evergrande before, and they have more debt than assets. And so I'm like, where does all the money go? But are they underselling? Are they estimating the cost to accomplish these units, and then they're selling them off, and the people end up making the money? Or like, how are they so upside down and all of this? Where I'm like, you get the money up front.
Well, they only become upside down when you stop being able to bring more people into it, right? Like the infrastructure costs of these are no joke, right? Like
I think they might be underestimating them then. They must be, because otherwise they'd be making hand over fist money. Or are people taking, like, our owners taking out, like, not owners, like people who buy, but the actual corporations taking a shit ton of money? Someone's gonna be taking the money somewhere. So it's either the owners are making money by they bought it for 300, 3 years later they close on it and they sell it for 500. And so Evergrande's is underselling it because they didn't factor in all the inflation to build and all the infrastructure costs. Or is Evergrande's, like, executive team just taking home $10 billion paychecks all day, and there's
little
no
column
money?
A, little column B.
You know what I mean?
It raises it's a good question, and then you bring in all the items of corruption. So speaking of which, then there was this mortgage strike, and this started off as a very small thing.
I tried this. It doesn't work here.
It doesn't work here. We're not organized enough. But you say that in jest, but here's where you can start seeing some potential links to what could happen in Western countries. Because this is, now we're reaching the point of social unrest. And I don't know if you heard, but they tend to keep a cap on things when it comes to social unrest in China. So the fact that these people are protesting and going on work strike, like, that shows the level of anger and vitriol in this
People are really
situation.
risking their lives for this.
100%, right? So these people who had bought in these developments, and it started with one little development, a bunch of people who had purchased made a petition, and they lobbied their local municipality to basically say that if the developer doesn't finish their units in 3 months, the buyers of this community are going to stop paying their mortgage. And it was kind of like a little drop in the bucket. It's a pretty big country, but now that has grown to over 300 developments, thousands and thousands of units. And it's obviously, once everyone stops injecting money into this pyramid-esque system, and the banks stop having this money that they've loaned out aggressively being paid back,
They're also
things
now-
start to get a little dicey.
It's also crushing new sales because everyone's losing confidence.
Oh yeah, the consumer confidence is at an all-time low. Recently, there were 5 banks that were frozen. So individuals who deposited money at these banks, and again, these aren't necessarily as big banks as we're used to here in Canada. These are smaller scale banks. 5 of them were frozen. That meant people went there to draw out money and were declined. There was no money there because the way that system works, like that fractional reserve that we talked about, is it's all fine and dandy so long as everyone doesn't go in and say, I want my money back at the same time. Because then they'll be like, well, we actually only had about like $1,000. We just happened to lend it out. And other banks, it moved over to their bank and then they also lent it out. So collectively as the banks, we kind of just lent out a bunch of money that we didn't necessarily have stored in the accounts. So all these people went in to withdraw their money. The banks plural effectively folded up and said, no, we don't have any cash. There was also some banks that were flat out running fraudulent lending practices where they were just taking the money and with little intent of ever actually paying it back. And so now you get these major demonstrations at all of these banks across the country, and a country that typically tries to squash this stuff. So they're keeping it off social media. But this is going to trickle down because it's not just, say, smaller banks, but bigger banks are heavily over leveraged in these development projects largely.
Yeah. So
collapse is a coming, man.
Yeah.
In some form or the
other. That
other.
was a long-winded thing of saying that it was very well spoken, though. I'm not going to discredit you there. But yeah, something's got to change. Something's going to give, and we're seeing that take place now. And on the flip side, the Chinese government is seeing this, and they're trying to step in. And so they're giving developers loans to get projects done. They're giving cash incentives to get things finished.
They also lowered their interest rate, which is different than what we're doing
They're
here.
lowering their interest rate. They're also giving payment holidays. So they're saying, hey, you guys don't have to make your payments, and we won't hit your credit. So they're making, like, the government's trying to make everything to do to try and reinstill the confidence and keep this wheel turning. What I really want to talk about, we've alluded to it a few times, but how this impacts us. There's so many ways. Like, you need to consider this means that there is so much less wealth creation taking place within China, and we accept a ton of Chinese investment. And like, you see it, and they're buying homes here, they're then moving here, they're spending money here, they're doing to our education systems here. And a lot of people are like, well, that's good. We don't want these foreign buyers buying our homes. Again, we've talked about before, but the value of them buying our houses is so high. It allows us to grow. The ripple effect that it has is worth so much for us. The TD projects that, like, the other thing is commodity prices. So they're such a massive consumer. We export so much to China. Like, we have such a large trade relationship with them. Like, that exporting is going to be so valuable. I know so many of my clients that export directly to China with food and materials and products, and on the flip side, we import a ton of stuff. So
I think you hit the nail on the head there. I mean, there's a certain point where this is going to trickle down to factories.
Exactly. And so when commodity prices drop, and like, there's a ton of factories in Canada that more than 50% of their product is going to China. So when they stop buying that because their market is now crashed or slowed or stopped, like, we are going to take a massive hit. And that's going to, if you're thinking about, like, how's it going to impact my real estate? Less jobs means less money going to the economy. That means lower house prices go down because people either need to sell or don't have the ability to then buy up. All of those things. So it has a massive repercussion for us in so many ways. Like, it's not a good thing to watch them burn. We're in a global economy. Any country, like, really of any scale or size that we are involved with, if they're hurting, in return, we are going to hurt. So I'm nervous about this. And also, China's always been one that they move, I feel like, a little faster and a little ahead of us. And so sometimes what they're facing, we end up facing. Because like Chandler alluded to 15 times, is we run a very similar system to the Chinese economy. Like, we run a very similar concept. We're a little less aggressive. And so a lot of times we feel it a little less pain. But if we don't necessarily feel their pain, but I don't want even 1/10 of their pain, right? And so that's something that we need to consider. I do want to boycott my mortgage payments, though.
Well, we're talking about a situation where people lose faith in the banking system because there's corruption and fraudulent banking. Like, obviously, that's going to impact how that whole economy starts to spend, right? Like, when the whole thing that happens in a recession, well, part of what happens in a recession is consumers lose confidence. So they don't spend as much, and that slows down the economy. And you talked about all the ripple effects that could have for us here. But these same institutions are lending to the major producers in that country, and the whole factory and the chain of supply thing relies heavily on a robust Chinese like labor supply, right?
Yep.
Making these things. And if that dries up and these factories close, like we already saw the challenges in the supply chain during the pandemic, and a lot of it had to do with China not being totally open. And this is the other little like weird little parallel of what's going on. They still have a zero COVID policy over there, which is curious because the rest of the world has gotten back to business more or
zero
less.
COVID. What's that? What's their zero COVID policy?
Like if they find a case, they do a
They throw you in the ocean.
You gone. No, like they lock down like the entire city or region or whatever.
Okay.
Yeah, they're shooting for zero COVID period. And I've always wondered, like, man, what do they know that we don't know? That always concerned me because why are they still stuck on these, all right, there are 4 cases, shut down the entire province. Like they go crazy with it. But that's obviously stifling the economy. And we felt those ramifications. On the flip side, there's going to be a mass exodus of rich Chinese people getting out of that country. That money's got to go somewhere.
We hope so. And hopefully they want to come here. But like, it is. I'm just like spiraling in my head. I'm like, it's like the worst storm. It's like if they're having the lockdowns and they're having this economic shutdown, it's actually going to cause the cost of things to go up. Like the actual consumer goods that we consume. But then on the flip side, where they're not using as much like raw commodity, it's actually going to cause the commodity pricing sometimes to go down. Right. And things like oil and gas are going to take a huge beating, which we rely on heavily to make money for our country. So it's like we will make less money and have to pay more for things.
There's also going to be other ramifications. Like
we're not a producer of stuff. Like that's the thing. We can be we do a little bit of production of commodity. We should be doing about 10 times as much. But then we also don't produce like much for consumer goods. And so like they are the hub for consumer goods in this world. And they convert commodities into consumer goods. So the whole world's going to take a hit on that front.
There's also like desperate countries do desperate things. Russia's not a bad example of that recently, unfortunately. And China has started to reassert their positioning like with respect to Taiwan. And the military ramifications there are quite scary, right? And often regimes like this, when they get under duress, they start to, show their strength in military ways. And I think there's reasons to be concerned about that unrest over there as well. And we've seen how that impacts things too, because we're saying all these things of like how China's, own economic downturn can impact us. What if all of a sudden they do things geopolitically?
A war can help bring the fucking economy back.
Yeah, but also then now we kind of feel an ethical obligation to not trade with them. Right, we were already struggling with this. We relied on Russia a lot in ways that we don't like to admit. And look at the impact that has had. So I think between needing to see what has happened in their economy and when they got over leveraged and how they sort of spiraled, and seeing what that causes is certainly a lesson to us, and probably put some pressure on the central banks here in the U.S., Canada, and Europe as well. To make sure that we don't follow down that same path of over leveraging. So I think you'll see that in some of the monetary policy that we get here.
To speak of the over leveraging really quick, by the way, I had one stat that the country carries 270% debt relative to their GDP, and the states are 130%. So we're about half in the states. I didn't get Canada's, but we're still like, that's still insane.
Yeah.
Right. But
and then I think there's also just what can we learn from them? How might that influence our monetary policy here as we see that? Then also, what could that do to our supply chain? And our import-export business. I think it's naive to think it's not going to have major impacts on that. And then potentially some really significant political unrest. But it's also a cool little sign of what could happen when your populace says enough is enough. These inflated prices, this kind of
if they're able to speak
system.
up in China, it could really set the tone for a lot of different countries, because I think, like you said, they're in a place where that is very frowned upon and effectively not allowed.
But lastly, there's going to be a lot of money coming over here. A lot.
You're thinking that's going to push. But they really locked that down. Like I have clients from China, and they're like, getting my money out of China to here was so hard. And it's not because
Oh,
Canada won't
100%.
accept it. It's because China won't let me leave with it. And with this going on, like, they're not stupid to the fact of what this is going to cause. They're going to make it even harder. Talk about freezing banks up so you
Yeah.
can't pull your money out.
Yeah.
If the
But
bank's frozen, you're not going anywhere.
if those people see the writing on the wall, it's like, okay, I either go down with the ship
Yeah.
or I take my money and get out of here.
They can't get their money. So it's like if you leave, you have no money. You're starting
Yeah.
again.
But you already see it with all these Russian billionaires and multimillionaires.
Russia's
who are
not as
getting out.
aggressively
Yeah.
freezing it up. China's always been doing that for years where you couldn't get your money out.
Yeah.
And now, again, if they're freezing banks, you are not getting your money. You just have to leave. You have to start
You
fresh.
wanna-
Like, I was a multimillionaire in China, and now I'm starting from scratch again.
So this is a little teaser about the conspiracy episode because there's a little conspiracy attached to this as
we've
well.
been teasing. Give us 100 likes.
Yeah, go on there. Check the last episode.
YouTube, please.
Crush like. We get to 100 likes. We're going to get the conspiracy episode up there. But here's a little other thing. So they were one of the very first trackers of people and their COVID status and all
Yeah.
that. And you can get this alert. And green means you're good. You've tested negative. Red means you're bad. And you get immediately kind of quarantined and isolated.
Yeah.
Some of these protesters have alleged that, curiously, just before any protests that they've been about to do, their status
Goes
was
red.
changed and turned to red, which immediately required them to go into isolation. And as such, kind of delayed their protests. So if you want to be a big conspiracy theorist, maybe they see COVID tracking and isolation as a way to control a
Control their
populace
public.
that they now think might be bubbling with rage here shortly when they realize there was a bit of a house of cards going on and it's going to collapse.
Yeah, I'm all
So-
for that.
Of course, you were all for that.
You know I'm all
as soon
for
as
that.
I came across that,
I'm
I was
convinced
like, oh, Neal's
it's-
going to love this.
It makes sense. I mean, I feel like, yeah, you see some of this stuff go on even here, like random call outs and things. People who don't want to make a presentation or don't want to come in front of a certain group of people. And then conveniently they get COVID. And it's like, okay,
Right.
that is interesting. It's also when you're trying to show a unit.
Oh, yeah,
or
those
get an
tenants always have
appraisal
COVID.
done,
It's crazy.
and then
Anytime you
somehow
need to get in there.
Your tenants in the entire building get COVID.
Yeah.
But anyways, I think we're going to cap it there with the China stuff. But understanding it is
Heavy
very
China
heavy
content
stuff.
there.
Honestly, look into it. Think about it. I wouldn't just be naive to it. Like, oh, well, that's on the other side of the world. It is going to impact us very heavily. And if you're just listening for real estate stuff, it's going to impact the real estate world, whether it be the cost to put stuff up, the demand, or the investment from overseas. It's going to have an impact on everything we do.
Totally.
So we wanted to get into it a little bit because you got to start thinking ahead for this stuff. And we've already talked about inflation and interest rates a million times. So this, I think, is really important to cover. But
Yeah.
talking about us, way
yeah.
more hyper locally. What do you got going on?
Well, I've got accepted offers now on that package of properties that I was talking about for quite some time. It's kind of a mixed bag: 16-unit vacant land, duplex, house, triplex.
Yeah.
All directly beside another property that I own. So I'm heavily invested kind of in this little area.
Yeah.
I've got accepted offers now. We figured out how to structure the deal, and I say offers plural because we are breaking it up for financing purposes. So that looks promising.
Yeah.
So working towards that. And then just continuing on the renovation, I ordered countertops and appliances for a couple units at the 8-unit building, which
What do you go for countertops?
I'm going my highest yet. So I got jade stone in there, like we're using
Nice.
synthetic stone. And I always feel like I forget about appliances when I'm doing my numbers, at least in my head. You're like, damn, man, $3,000 a unit, 2
Spend
units,
$3,000 a unit.
right?
Yeah.
Like,
Who'd you get them from?
At Home Depot. Are we giving all this free plugs away though? Home
Yeah,
Depot
okay,
doesn't
well, that's
sponsor
enough.
us.
Well, they don't sponsor us. I got a better appliance plug, so go to Patreon.
Okay. And so it's bittersweet because I'm like, man, this is extra money just coming out. But then in that particular building, it's like, all right, that means I've got 2 places now that I'm doing countertops and appliances.
Yeah.
There's only 8 units in the building. It's like, that means I'm 25% down the building, really.
Yeah.
Right? Like I'm getting there on that building, which I'm super excited about to close that one up and
Sweet.
move on to the next one. So,
Sweet.
but keeping the ball rolling and hoping that package of properties closes sometime in September.
Awesome.
So then that'll
That's soon.
officially kind of tap me out, hopefully for this year. For the love of God, I can't find anything more this year. I'm extended. What about you?
Yeah.
What's going on?
I'm not buying anything right now. I've been looking at some stuff. It's funny, a few deals that I worked on in the past have come back across my table, even though they took different
They're a little
offers.
lower?
And yeah, they're willing to negotiate a little more and talk a little bit more. I'm back and forth. Everyone knows I'm back and forth on whether I want to keep buying right now or like sit on the sidelines. I'm probably going to make some moves if the deal really, really makes sense. But I'm also very hesitant right now to buy older product because I'm just like the government and everyone is against purchasing older product and trying to make it a little bit cleaner, I guess. And so
You can say it. They're against renovictions and
yeah, they're against
landlords and-
renovations, they're against landlords and the whole system. And I understand. And the idea is to incentivize new construction, which I think they're successfully doing. But on the backside of it, the problem is they also need to incentivize with more financing options and like
'cause that's not feasible right now, and those rates are going to go up again.
it's not
3
feasible.
more times.
You
this year.
you saw it last night. Like Crombie said, they're also parking a project that they had that was going to start this year, a massive 300 unit building downtown.
Yeah.
They said, yeah, we're going to wait a little bit because there's a lot of uncertainty in the market right now. And so that's where everyone's at. But I'm hoping in this I can pick up some sites or a bigger build. I'm like the dream for me would be even finding a build where someone's not able necessarily to get out and I can hopefully get into it. But that would be my biggest thing that I'm concerned about. I met with some brokers yesterday too, and they said, man, these projects are great, but I'm concerned I can't get you out. And like, I don't think I'll even be able to get you 65% on the back end on that. And I know I'm doing a refi right now on one of my properties, and realistically, we're getting an exception made to get 68% on the takeout. It works because of how good of a
68% on
yeah.
takeout?
And like, I have rents that just demolish
Wow.
the initial appraisal. Like we demolished the
That's
initial appraisal,
depressing.
and they're only getting me 68% on the takeout. And they're like, this is where the struggle lies. And I'm getting a mixed bag from people I talk to about where the rates are going to be in a year. And they don't necessarily say that they're going to be way higher, but they may not be much lower. And if they aren't, like, you need insane rental rates to be able to pull money out because our cap rates have dropped so much.
Yeah.
Before when we had 8 and 10 caps, it didn't matter. But now that Halifax trades probably with like an average like a 5.5 cap, it matters when the rate is 6%.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's what we're facing. And so for me, I'm just, again, back and forth, and these tighter deals just don't excite me. But other than that, I think I might have mentioned it last time, but like a third Airbnb up, it's doing great already. It's booked up a bunch. We're going to switch them to long-term rentals. And that's kind of everything. I'm actually honestly kind of shopping for a house for myself. I want to.
Yeah, you were saying that before we popped on.
So
I
if
know
anyone's got a
great
good
agent,
deal
you know.
somewhere in the peninsula in Halifax, let me know. I gladly look at it. I need a crib.
Cool. All right. Well, I think that's enough for today. We're going to wrap up.
Yeah.
But if you've listened to this point, you obviously love the content. So don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe. Please share this with someone. If you can just throw it up on your social media while you're listening to it, that's awesome. If you're checking this out on Spotify or iTunes or whatever it is that you listen to podcasts on,
Apple Podcasts,
and you
YouTube.
Want to flip over to YouTube just to give us a like, that makes a big difference. You might have noticed that our last couple videos have done really well, and that's totally because you guys have taken the half a second to go and click a like. Any comments below? I'd love to hear people's thoughts on what's going on in China. Also, if you still have your ICQ number, I challenge anyone to throw it up there if you actually remember it.
ICQ.
Neil doesn't know what that is. So thanks so much for listening. More great stuff coming. So check out the Patreon if you haven't yet. It's there.
Check out our new YouTube videos, and we're very different style. So
we're doing some new con.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Peace.
Thanks so much for watching the episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, press like. Don't forget to subscribe. But also check us out on Instagram and TikTok. You can find all the links below. Thanks again for checking us out.
When I was broke, I had rich habits. When I was broke, I had rich habits.